On April 5th, 1933, the definition of private property in America was deleted overnight. Executive Order 61-2 didn't just confiscate wealth, it threatened 10 years in federal prison for trying to protect it. But while history remembers the gold, it forgot Executive Order 68-14 when they came back for your silver. And right now, the digital infrastructure is finalized to execute this exact same seizure in 2026 without knocking on a single door. The era of physical raids is over. The era of digital encirclement has begun. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It is a forensic reality written into UCC Article 8 in the FedNow architecture. When the next order is signed, your assets won't be physically taken. They will simply be legally reclassified. This investigation exposes the mechanics of the 2026 plan and reveals the survivor's inventory, the specific list of assets that legally bypass the confiscation. But to understand the digital trap being built for tomorrow, we must first autopsy the physical heist that was successfully executed yesterday. The blueprint for the future is hidden in the past. Most people believe the 1933 confiscation was an emergency measure to stabilize a collapsing banking system. The official narrative says it was about safety, but the Treasury's own ledger tells a different story. It wasn't a rescue operation, it was a heist. Here's the math they don't teach in economics class. In April, the government forced every American citizen to surrender their gold. They paid you the official statutory price, $20.67 an ounce. If you refused, you faced prison. So the public complied. The gold flowed from private safes into government vaults. Once the government held the physical metal, they waited. Then, in January 1934, they passed the Gold Reserve Act. With a single legislative stroke, they revalued gold to $35 an ounce. Do the math. That is an instant statutory devaluation of the dollar by 40.9%. The Treasury booked a profit of $2.8 billion, money that was effectively stolen from the purchasing power of every saver who obeyed the law. Imagine you are locked inside a casino. You aren't allowed to leave. You hold chips that you bought for $10 each. Suddenly, the House announces that the rules have changed. They force you to turn in your $10 chips, and they hand you back $6 in return. You are still in the building. You still have chips. But 40% of your labor has evaporated into the House's pocket just because they changed the definition of value. That is what happened in 1934. But the gold owners were actually the lucky ones. At least they knew the rules were changing. The silver owners were ambushed. While history remembers the gold order, it almost always forgets the second attack. 4 months later, on August 9th, 1934, the pattern repeated. President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 68-14, the nationalization of silver. They didn't just want the yellow metal, they wanted the white metal too. They seized 113 million ounces at 50 cents an ounce. But here is the mechanism that matters for 2026. They didn't just send men with guns to kick down doors. They used a weapon that is far more efficient, the tax code. The order imposed a 50% tax on all profits derived from silver transfers. This is the technical detail that destroys the "I'll just hide it" argument. If you tried to sell your silver, the government took half immediately. If you tried to keep it, you risked prison. They created a system where the asset became toxic to hold and impossible to sell. Picture the scene. Armored trucks loaded with silver bars, leaving private vaults, heading to the Treasury, melting down private generational wealth into government ingots. They used a physical tax to enforce a physical seizure. Today, they have a digital tax to enforce a digital seizure. And the legal trap they have built in Article 8 is far more sophisticated than a simple executive order. This sophistication relies entirely on a single, dangerous misconception that 99% of investors still believe. The sentiment is repeated thousands of times. I don't keep my money in the bank. I own my assets. They can't touch me. It is a comforting thought. It is also legally incorrect. The trap for the next crisis isn't being built with physical laws. It has been built with commercial code. While everyone was worried about the Federal Reserve printing money, the legal definition of ownership was quietly rewritten under your nose. It is hidden in a document called the Uniform Commercial Code, specifically Article 8. This is the operating system for the entire financial world, adopted by all 50 states. And if you read the text of Section 503, you will discover that you do not own what you think you own. When you buy a stock, a bond, or even a share of a precious metals ETF through a broker, the law does not classify you as a purchaser. It classifies you as a security entitlement holder. That sounds like legal jargon, but the distinction is fatal. Under Article 8, you do not have a direct property right to the specific share or the specific bar of silver in the vault. Instead, you have a contractual claim against your broker for a pro rata share of a pool of assets. You have a beneficial interest, not legal title. Here's the mechanism of the trap. If your broker or the custodian bank becomes insolvent, your assets are not sitting safely in a box with your name on it. They are pooled into the general liquidity of the bank, and under the law, you become an unsecured creditor. You are last in line. Let me give you an analogy to make this concrete. Imagine you drive your car to a luxury hotel and hand the keys to the valet. In your mind, you still own that car. You believe that if the hotel goes bankrupt, you can just walk into the garage and drive your vehicle away. But under the rules of Article 8, you didn't park your car, you exchanged your car for a claim ticket. If the garage burns down, or if the hotel sells the garage to pay its debts, you don't get your car back. You get a spot in line with everyone else holding a ticket, hoping there's enough insurance money to pay you pennies on the dollar. That is the difference between property ownership and a security entitlement. You hold the ticket, but they hold the keys. This legal framework is the first half of the encirclement. It locks down everything inside the system. Your 401ks, your IRAs, your digital silver ETFs. They don't need to confiscate these assets. They just need to freeze the ledger. But I know what you are thinking. This is why I hold physical silver. This is why I have the metal in my hand. Article 8 can't touch me. You're right. The commercial code cannot seize atoms. But the government doesn't need to seize the atoms to destroy your wealth. They only need to control the gateway where you try to convert those atoms back into currency. This brings us to the second half of the 2026 trap, the digital fence. The biggest myth in the precious metals community is the door-to-door fantasy. People are preparing for 1933. They are imagining federal agents knocking on doors with metal detectors. Why would the government waste manpower doing that? It is inefficient, dangerous, and bad optics. In the digital age, they don't need to come to your house. They simply wait for you to come to them. The enforcement arm of this new seizure is already live. It is called FedNow. FedNow is the Federal Reserve's instant payment infrastructure. It connects every bank account in the country into a single, unified, real-time ledger. It allows for absolute visibility of every transaction, down to the penny instantly. When the crisis hits and the currency resets, the government will likely implement a windfall profit tax on precious metals. This isn't a theory, there is precedent. In 1980, the Crude Oil Windfall Profit Tax Act seized up to 70% of the difference between the market price and a statutory base price. In 2026, the mechanism will be automated. Let's say silver hits $200 an ounce. You decide to sell your stack to pay off your mortgage or buy food. You go to a coin shop or an online dealer. But the dealer is plugged into FedNow. They are legally required to report the purchase. When they transfer the digital currency to your bank account, the system automatically flags the transaction. The algorithm is capable of calculating the windfall instantly. If the 1980 precedent is applied, the system automatically deducts the tax before the money even settles. You sold $200 worth of silver. You received $20 of spending power. This is the digital fence. You are standing inside the fence in the digital economy where you buy groceries, pay taxes, and use electricity. Your physical silver is sitting outside the fence. It has immense value, theoretically. But the moment you try to bring it across the border, the moment you try to convert it into usable liquidity, the toll booth takes 90% of it. You aren't a criminal. You aren't in prison. You still own your silver. You can sit in your living room and stack it as high as you want. but functionally, its economic energy has been captured. The black market won't save you either. In a fully digital currency regime, cash is eliminated or severely restricted. If you trade your silver for a service, say asking a contractor to fix your roof, that contractor eventually needs to spend that silver. He has to enter the digital system to pay his supplier or his property tax. He faces the same 90% wall. Because of this friction, the street value of your silver collapses. Nobody wants an asset they can't spend. This is the concept of unsellable wealth. It is the ultimate trap. You prepared. You bought the right asset. You held it in your hand. But because you didn't understand the digital encirclement, you are left holding a relic that has been demonetized by the system. So the question changes. It is no longer, do I own gold and silver? The question is, do I own the specific type of gold and silver that is legally allowed to pass through the fence? They left a back door open for themselves, and if you know what to look for, you can walk right through it. Because every draconian law in history is written with a specific escape hatch for the architects who designed it, and Executive Order 6102 was the blueprint. If you read the order quickly, you see the prison sentence, you see the demand for surrender. But if you stop scanning and start reading forensically, you will find a small paragraph near the bottom. It is labeled Section 2B. This is the paragraph that saved the fortunes of the informed minority in 1933. And it is the legal precedent that forms the basis of the green list for 2026. The text explicitly states that the confiscation order does not apply to, and I am quoting the document directly here, gold coins having a recognized special value to collectors of rare and unusual coins. This is known as the Numismatic Exemption. Why would a government desperate for money leave this massive loophole open? It wasn't out of kindness, it was out of classification. To understand why this works, you have to understand how the government views assets. They view gold bullion, bars, modern coins, generic rounds, as a commodity. It is raw financial fuel. It is a currency substitute. Therefore, it competes with the dollar and must be seized or taxed, but they view collectibles differently. Think of it this way. Imagine you have a canvas made of pure gold. If that canvas is blank, it is just a raw material. The government can seize it, melt it down, and use it. It is just a commodity. But now, imagine a master artist paints a portrait on that gold canvas. It stops being a raw material and becomes a piece of art. It becomes history. It becomes culture. If the government were to seize that painting and melt it down for the gold content, they would be destroying a historical artifact. The value of the art exceeds the value of the canvas. Legally, it has crossed a line from financial asset to historical object. In 1933, this distinction allowed wealthy families to keep their gold. As long as the coin was rare or unusual, meaning it had historical significance, it was untouchable. They didn't have to surrender it. They didn't have to pay the tax. They simply reclassified their wealth from bullion to numismatics. This is why you see such a high premium today on what is called pre-33 gold. These are the coins minted before the ban. They aren't just expensive because they are old. They are expensive because they are the only form of gold that has a proven, battle-tested legal immunity to executive seizure. But gold wasn't the only survivor. There is a second category on the survivor's inventory that is much more accessible, and it relates to silver. We call it young junk silver, or more respectfully, constitutional silver. These are the dimes, quarters, and half dollars minted by the United States before 1965. They contain 90% silver, but unlike a generic silver bar you buy from a private mint, these coins have a superpower. They are U.S. legal tender. A silver eagle or a generic bar is defined as bullion. It is property. A 1964 Kennedy half dollar is defined as money. It has a face value of 50 cents. This creates a legal paradox that protects the holder. For the government to confiscate or heavily tax these coins based on their metal content, they would have to legally undermine their own currency. They would have to declare that U.S. coinage is no longer money. Historically, Governments hate doing this because it destroys confidence in the entire monetary system. So they tend to ignore these coins. They leave them alone. In the 1934 silver nationalization, while bullion bars were being loaded onto trucks and melted down, the silver coinage in people's pockets and jars was largely ignored. It was too difficult to categorize, too dispersed among the population, and legally too complex to seize without breaking the definition of the dollar itself. So, here is the reality of the loophole list. The digital fence we talked about, the FedNow tracking, the windfall tax, the UCC reclassification, it is designed to catch the easy money. It is designed to catch the ETFs in your brokerage account. It is designed to catch the generic bullion that looks like a commodity. But the system struggles to categorize the exceptions. The wealthy do not hold their assets in the form that is easiest to buy. They hold their assets in the form that is hardest to seize. They move their liquidity into numismatics, into constitutional silver, into assets that sit in the green zone of the legal code. They aren't just collecting coins, they are buying legal insurance. Now, does this mean you should sell everything and buy old coins? Not necessarily. Because while these assets offer protection, they come with their own risks, premiums, liquidity issues, and authentication. You have seen the trap. You have seen the escape hatch. The final step is to assess your own position. You need to look at your personal inventory and ask, am I holding a commodity that can be taxed, or am I holding history that must be preserved? History has cast its vote on what survives. Now, you have to cast yours. When you view the timeline from altitude, the pattern becomes undeniable. We have moved from the physical seizures of 1933 to the digital encirclement of 2026. The mechanism has evolved, but the intent remains identical. The transfer of purchasing power from the saver to the state. The government does not need to kick down your door to destroy your wealth. They only need to control the digital gateway where you try to spend it. Now you must conduct your own forensic audit. If your portfolio relies on ETFs, unallocated accounts, or digital derivatives, you are holding a claim ticket for a car that does not exist. Under UCC Article 8, you are inside the fence. You are an unsecured creditor waiting for a settlement that may never come. If you hold generic bullion, you possess the asset, but you face the friction of the windfall tax. You are at the gate. But if you hold the assets on the survivor's inventory, constitutional silver and numismatics, you hold the only form of wealth that history proves can pass through the wall untouched. The law is clear. Executive Order 6102 penalized the hoarders, but protected the collectors. You can hope that this time is different, that the state has lost its appetite for other people as wealth. Or you can align your position with the exemptions they wrote for themselves. The variable is no longer the system. The variable is you. History has cast its vote. Now you have to cast yours. You have the inventory. Now you need the timeline. This digital infrastructure is not theoretical. It is being installed in phases. Stage 2 of our investigation tracks the specific implementation dates of the FedNow control grid. That analysis reveals the 3 signals that indicate the fence is going live. Subscribers get the Stage 2 briefing when the Federal Reserve's next pilot program launches that drops Friday.